So I said to her, "Is this fresh brewed iced tea?" And she said, "Yes, it is." I was on a long drive on a hot summer day from Washington, D.C. to Charlottesville, Virginia. And by the time I got to Charlottesville, I was thirsty. So I stopped at one of the convenience stores along the way. And I noticed right away that it had an iced tea dispenser. Now I'm an iced tea fan. Fresh brewed, unsweetened, maybe add a fresh lemon or a fresh mint, that would be even better. And so I bought an extra large 84-ounce bladder-busting cup of iced tea. I paid the nice lady, and I got back in the car, and I got on the highway. And I'm thinking to myself as I'm driving, finally, this is what I've been looking for, just what I wanted. And I took one sip, and I realized that this nice lady in Charlottesville wasn't so nice after all, because she was spouting the lies of Satan behind that counter. This was not fresh brewed iced tea at all. This was that pre-packaged glop that tastes like a combination of flat club soda and motor oil. I'm sure you know what I'm talking about, with that faint hint of aluminum as its final note. I said some words that later on I had to go make a confession. I pulled off the road, I emptied out that 83.5 ounces of mess, and it ate away part of the road surface. And so I got back into my car and drove on to the next exit off of 64, where I got 80 ounces of Diet Coke. But it really wasn't what I was looking for. I'm sure many of you have been in that situation where sometimes only the real thing will satisfy. Nothing else is going to make it. Sometimes we just have a hankering for something, and we just have to have it. And we get so thirsty, and we get it into our brains that only one thing is going to really quench that thirst. The woman in today's gospel goes to the well because she's thirsty and she needs water. But as we read in today's gospel, we discover something that she herself doesn't even know as she heads to the well with a bucket. We discover along with her that she's thirsting for something more than water. She's thirsting for something authentic. And she has learned apparently what happens when we try to satisfy our deepest thirst, our real thirst, with what is inauthentic. John tells us that this woman is a Samaritan. And because of the historical realities of that day, Samaritans and Jewish people had nothing to do with each other. They didn't like each other. They judged each other. She is a Samaritan. Jesus is a Jew. She is a woman living in a patriarchal world. And apparently, she is even an outcast of some kind within her own Samaritan community. Historians tell us that during that time, the women of a village would go together to the local well to fetch water, either in the morning or in the evening. But this woman goes by herself to the well in the heat of the day at high noon. Why might she be an outcast even within her own community? We find out that she has had 5 husbands. She's been married 5 times, and yet the man that she's currently living with is not her husband. And so apparently, she's kind of an early Elizabeth Taylor, if you will. Now, to be clear and fair, we don't know all the circumstances of those marriages, how they started or how they ended. But on some level, it appears that she is searching for something. She's seeking something. She is thirsty, if you will, for perhaps love, inclusion, or satisfaction. She has had 5 marriages. Has she found what she is looking for? Apparently, she has tried in different ways to satisfy the deepest thirst in her. She has tried to satisfy with stuff that is not authentic, with relationships that can't satisfy her. But all of that starts to change when Jesus breaks down the social barriers in today's gospel. Jesus engages with her. That just wasn't done back in those days. Men and women didn't speak like that in public, especially if one was a Jew and one was a Samaritan. But Jesus breaks through all of those social rules. And slowly this woman comes to understand that Jesus is what she has been thirsting for, that Jesus is what she has been praying for. And Jesus' vision of God's love for all people awakens in her a life-changing recognition. This is what I've been looking for all along, what he's saying, what he is offering. Slowly in this gospel passage, the woman whose name we never learn realizes that her deepest desire is for communion with God. And if she doesn't have that, she might be trapped in an endless cycle of trying to fill that place in her that belongs to God with things that won't satisfy her. In fact, at one point, Jesus says to her, and this is my loose translation, "You can keep on doing what you are doing, but you will always be thirsty." And it's not just a thirsty woman at a well who needs to learn that lesson. It is not some thirsty priest on Interstate 64 that needs that truth either. There are ways in which all of us fall into sinful traps at times. And Lent is that great time of the year when God's grace can free us from the traps. And we all, in one way or another, we all ignore the fact that we have a deep-seated need for communion with Christ. And only an authentic and active life of prayer and service is going to satisfy that desire. One priest I know used to say that we all have a God-sized hole in us, which means that only God is big enough to fill that hole. And sin happens whenever we try to fill that God-sized hole in us with things that aren't God. That's why we get caught up in cycles, going from one bad relationship to another, thinking in our loneliness that we will be satisfied, that we will be at peace, that we will have our heart's desire if only we get one more relationship. But it's our relationship with God that ultimately fulfills us, because God is authentic. And when some of us experience thirst in our souls, we tell ourselves that we might just drink enough alcohol to satisfy that void, or spend enough money in the mall. But your soul wasn't thirsting for Jack Daniels. It's thirsting for Jesus, because he is the one who is authentic. And some of us wrestle with the desire in our hearts, and we mistakenly tell ourselves, if I just climb the corporate ladder, if I just drive the right car, if I just achieve the right status in my community, then finally I will feel peace. But if we are not attending to our spiritual life, none of that other stuff will matter, because only Jesus is authentic. And there are times in life when every one of us have to wrestle with life's hardest questions. Why am I here? Some of you might be asking that question right now as I preach. Why am I here? Why are we here on earth? How can we make this world more sane, more safe, more just? We might be asking ourselves, why do bad things happen to good people? Why does a loved one get a cancer diagnosis? These are real questions, and either we turn to the Lord for our moments of confusions, or we end up desperately seeking to answer eternal questions from an earthly perspective. And it just doesn't work. And then we try to distract ourselves. We distract ourselves with the latest technology. We palliate the pain with more shopping. And we become filled with anger because we have questions that can't get answered. But nothing satisfies in those moments because only Christ can hold us in those moments. Only Christ can hold us in those questions. Only Christ can help us carry the cross that life presents us. Only Christ can lead us with his life-affirming spirit. The woman at the well in today's gospel, she dropped her bucket and she walked back to the village without it. Because at the end, what she found wouldn't fit the bucket. She found what she was looking for. She found Jesus. And we also knew that because of her encounter with Jesus, she knew that she needed to change her behavior. And she went and shared the good news with the people in the village. She becomes a messenger. She becomes an evangelist. In other words, a preacher of the good news. John never tells us her real name, but I believe that if she, the Samaritan woman, were here in Novato preaching to us today, she might say the following: don't forget, at your deepest core, you crave a living relationship with Christ, because that's how you are made. So if you pray, if you worship, if you serve in the community of the church, you will find authentic love your heart desires. My friends, Jesus is worth it. Jesus is real. Jesus can fill you. Do not settle for less.